Howdy folks, got another Bladeslinger vlog for you. I finally finished the Silent Hill 2 remake after an entire month of playing it. It took me a lot longer to finish than I thought it would, mostly because I've just had more important things going on in my life right now. But I really wanted to play this game, I really wanted to finish it, and I really wanted to give you guys my thoughts on it because, yeah, I got a lot to say about this one. So before I go any further, I think I should comment on my opinions on the original Silent Hill 2. Silent Hill 2 is one of my all-time favorite video games in regards to story, horror, artistic direction, technicals, all that stuff. Silent Hill 2 is just a masterclass in and of itself. There are very few games I've played that are as thought-provoking and interesting as Silent Hill 2. And while it's not a game that I play frequently, mostly due to the fact that it's just one of those games that you need to be in the right mood to play, it's just one of those games that I have the utmost respect for, and it has remained one of my go-to examples of video games as an art form. That being said, it is also a game that I've always wanted to see a remake of, and there are three reasons for that. The obvious reason is, despite what a lot of people would have you think, Silent Hill 2 isn't a game that has aged all that well. Now, that's not to say that there aren't aspects of it that don't hold up, that do hold up. The story, the graphics, all that stuff is still fantastic and it's worth playing the game for alone. But in regards to gameplay, Silent Hill 2 honestly isn't that great. The camera is sloppy, the combat is super unsatisfying, and though the exploration and horror aspects of it are pretty good, the survival aspect is a little shallow, and there is some obtuse design with the puzzles, so it is a game that I felt could benefit from a do-over. Another reason I wanted to see it get remade was because I thought it would be a good way to soft reboot the franchise. Course correct from the direction Silent Hill 3 took and shift away from the occult horror of the first game in favor of focusing on the personal horror that Silent Hill 2 introduced, which I thought was far more interesting than any other game in the series. And last but not least, and I feel like this is one that a lot of the remake's detractors are missing, Silent Hill 2 is lost media. Yeah, somehow Konami lost the source code to one of the greatest horror games of all time, and as a result, it can never be remastered. They could probably re-release the ROM via emulation on PS4 or something, but then people would probably complain that they just released it as is instead of trying to update it. But they can't do that because, they don't have it anymore. And believe me, they have tried. Everyone remembers the Silent Hill HD collection from 2012, I think it was. And it was just a complete and utter abomination. So a remake was the best bet. However, when I heard who they had gotten to make the game, I was a little concerned. Konami had tasked the Bluebird team with remaking the game, and they were primarily known for the admittedly creepy but ultimately shallow horror game Layers of Fear. I, like everyone else, didn't think that these were the right guys to bring back one of the all-time great horror games. But, everyone deserves a chance, and how I typically, get hyped for a horror game is to just stay away from as much of the media coverage as possible because I just want to be able to go into it blind. Especially in this case because it is Silent Hill 2, I'm already familiar with it. I've played the game 3 times over the course of my life in the past decade or so. So, yeah, I really did not want to have any of my opinions tainted by anything. But I was still concerned that Bloomberg just didn't have the skills to do the game justice. However, I am very happy to report that that ends up not being the case because Bloomberg did an exceptional job bringing this game back. The Silent Hill 2 remake is fantastic on all accounts, and I'm very excited to say that because it just brings me great joy to see this game brought to a new generation. So, one of the first smart moves that the Bluebird team made with the remake is that they knew to leave well enough alone with the story. So, for those of you who don't know, Silent Hill 2 tells the tale of James Sunderland, a man who travels to the town of Silent Hill upon receiving a letter from his wife Mary that she is waiting for him there in their special place. And this is a little unnerving for James because his wife is dead, and she has been for the past 3 years. James knows she's not around anymore. Yet, for whatever reason, James still heads to the town in hopes that his wife really is there, only to find that Silent Hill isn't a place you really want to be spending a lot of time in because there is a supernatural presence within the town that conjures all kinds of strange and disturbing stuff, and now James has to face it if he hopes to find his wife again. So, when people talk about the story of Silent Hill 2, they often cite the symbolism, the themes, all that stuff, and, really go in depth with why the story is good. And a lot of the time I feel like people are overthinking it because the reason the story of Silent Hill 2 is so special is not that it's so thematically rich, it's that it just does something that most horror games doesn't, and that's have a horror game with really good, exceptional characters. Think about all the famous works of horror. How many of them actually have memorable protagonists? They probably have memorable monsters and villains, but they don't typically have good horror protagonists, and that's where Silent Hill 2 kind of flips the script. Silent Hill 2 doesn't really have a major villain per se. You can make the argument that the town itself is the villain, but it's such a vague and underplayed aspect of it that, and never really the focus either. The focus of Silent Hill 2 is the character study of James Sunderland, and the way they tell that through the horror of his experiences in the town. It's still one of the all-time great stories in any horror game, period. Not just horror games, too. One of the best horror stories ever. I've always said that James is probably the best horror protagonist of all time, and I still stand by that. And that's to speak nothing of all the other great characters there in the game. James isn't the only character who is making his way through Silent Hill at the time, and as you make your way through the game, you realize that they're dealing with their own demons in the town. And though James will cross paths with them and occasionally help them, it's very clear that they are on their own journey and he is on his. And though he sympathizes with them, he's got his own reasons for being in the town, and they don't really coincide with why they're there. And yes, there is a lot of thematic elements to this game that are just undeniably deep. It is so much fun to deconstruct Silent Hill 2. Me and the MLG Panda just love talking about this game and trying to figure out what everything is supposed to represent in this game. But I'm not going to get into that here because, there's just so much to talk about, and everyone has already done that. So, if you want a really good video, I highly recommend a Super Eye Patch Plus video on it. But anyway, story is still fantastic, and yeah, they did change a few things here and there, but much like the Resident Evil 2 remake, they didn't do anything that, outright changes the overall tone or impact of the story. It's still Silent Hill 2 as I have always known and loved it, just, with a slightly nicer coat of paint. And speaking of that coat of paint, I think the images on screen just kind of speak for themselves. This game is just gorgeous, dude. Silent Hill looks amazing. The monsters are not overdone. They look about the same as they do in the original game. I was afraid they would be overly grotesque, but that's not the case. And the character designs are pitch perfect too. When I heard they were doing a remake, one of my biggest concerns was that they would try to make the characters look more appealing, try to make James look more handsome. And I've heard a lot of people argue that they just made him look like Leon Kennedy from Resident Evil, but that is not the case. If you really look at James, you can see a lot of the defining characteristics of the character that you really couldn't see all that well in the original game. His face, it's wrinkled. He's got sunken in eyes. If you look closely at his clothes, you can see they're hanging off his body loosely, which implies that he's really skinny under there. He hasn't been eating, he hasn't been taking care of himself. And even just the way he holds his guns, the way he carries himself, you can tell that this isn't a guy who finds himself getting into scuffles all that much. And the fact that he always has sort of this deadpan expression on his face, you just kind of get the sense that there's just not something right in his head. I remember playing the original Silent Hill 2 with my brother once, and him commenting on some of the stuff he's doing and saying, this guy can't be too smart. And I don't think that's the right word for that, but yeah, he is onto something there. I really wish that I could play Silent Hill 2 again for the first time, because it was just so much fun the first time. And though it is a lot of fun to play the game on a second playthrough, because there's a twist that recontextualizes everything, it's just not the same as the first time. Anyway, getting back to the presentation. Presentation is fantastic. I love the art direction. I love all the areas. My only complaint with it is, at times it felt like they might have been channeling the original Silent Hill here. Some of the otherworld sections do have that rustic and decayed look to it that you would saw during Harry Mason's time in the town, which I don't recall being the case for James a whole lot. The whole idea with Silent Hill 2 is that everything in the game is supposed to be personalized to James himself. So I think they might have been trying to tie the games together, and while those sections still look amazing, I don't think that was the right direction. But whatever floats your boat, still looks amazing. Characters are great. The only issue I have with the graphics really is that they can be a little unoptimized. I purchased the game on Steam, and I had to do a lot of messing around in the settings to get it to run right, and even then the game would frequently crash on me, which was very aggravating because this game still uses manual saves. So I eventually got on the PlayStation 5, and it ran much better there, but I still noticed a lot of graphical glitches too, so this game probably could use a few more coats of polish, which I'm sure they're going to keep doing, especially with the Steam version. I'm sure by the end of the year, this thing is going to run like grease lightning on just about any PC rig. As for the sound design, they did redo the voice acting, and I don't know how they managed to pull it off, but it still manages to maintain that same feel that the original Silent Hill 2 did. Silent Hill 2's voice acting is very strange in that there's just something off about the delivery of most characters, and I can never tell if Konami did that if Team Silent did that intentionally, or if it was just a happy accident. But it did add to the overall tone of the game, and they managed to maintain that here. The voice acting in this game is fantastic on all accounts, and while it might be a little stilted at times, that's kind of the point, because the characters at times don't even understand what they themselves are saying. They don't even understand what they're doing most of the time. So yeah, I was surprised that they managed to pull that off. The music is great. The series composer, who is the longest running contributor to the Silent Hill series, I think they've done the music for just about every game, has returned to do the music, and they hit it out of the park as always. The soundtrack is haunting, soothing, just about everything. It's fantastic. And sound effects are really satisfying too. It feels good to brain the monsters. You get a nice wet impact every time you hit something. And the guns feel nice and powerful, which some people might say is a bad thing, but it makes the game more fun to play. That's more satisfying than it ever was in the original game. But the main thing, that's all the bare minimum that Bloomberg team needed to do here. That is just, they just need to leave well enough alone and just bring it up to modern standards in regards to the presentation, and then just tell the story. It's basic thing to do with the Silent Hill 2 remake. What they needed to do here was make the game more fun to play, and they have definitely do that, because this is a marked improvement on the gameplay of the original Silent Hill on all accounts. For starters, gone are the tank controls, and gone is the dynamic camera, and I'm getting so sick of hearing people complain about the fact that they removed the fixed camera angles. Again, if you've been watching my series on the survival horror genre, Gameology, you'll know that that stuff is not necessary for a survival horror game. And they weren't even fixed cameras in the original game. Like, they were fixed some of the time, but most of the time the camera was moving dynamically, or for the majority of the game, you can choose where to put it. You can put it behind James or in front of him. I mean, there was no point to have that fixed camera in there, or dynamic camera, and because you had fixed camera angles sometime and necessitated tank controls, they've gotten rid of the fixed camera angles, the dynamic camera. They gotten rid of the tank controls, and it's all the better for it. Not only does it feel smoother to play, but now I can actually look around Silent Hill. I remember walking into the town for the first time, and rather than just looking forward, I was staring up at the sky because, like, that skyline was just so hauntingly beautiful, dude. Like, I felt like I was looking up at a Lovecraftian monster. Like, you see those pictures in H.P. Lovecraft's stories, the illustrations, and that's just Silent Hill to me, because Silent Hill is you always talk about how Silent Hill in a sense is alive, and you just kind of get that sense from that image alone, and then you keep playing the game and there's just so much to see and do. And I know a lot of people will say that with the fixed camera angles, again, not fixed most of the game, you can create very specific horrors. Well, here's the thing. If the cameras aren't fixed, make very specific horrors for the third-person camera, and that's exactly what they do here. There are plenty of moments in this game that are still scary, that still do play with player expectations. I played Silent Hill 2 before, and the game still surprised me plenty of times. As for the combat, for starters, there are some improvements to that as well. Rather than having to equip a melee weapon or a gun, now how it works is if you hit the fire button, that will make you do a melee attack, and if you hold the left trigger and then push the fire button, then James will fire his gun, and it works just as it does in a modern third-person shooter. As for the melee combat, this was where I was most concerned. Like, honestly, I thought the best move for a Silent Hill 2 remake would be to de-emphasize the melee combat as much as possible, because I feel like if you're inviting the enemy to you to have a brawl with them, then you're kind of losing the horror. But thankfully, they managed to make it work. I mean, I didn't want to see melee combat completely removed, because that is a big part of Silent Hill's identity. But I was also concerned that too much of it would really hurt the game, but they found a nice balance. For starters, the melee combat is much more responsive. When you go to hit an enemy, James will, just swing at them, and if they're on the ground, he will bring the thing down on top of them, which was something that was very finicky to do in the original game. It seemed like James would just swing randomly, and I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, James is an everyman. He doesn't know how to properly fight. I get that, but it doesn't take military training to know how to swing something heavy at an enemy. It's so stupid. But, so that's more responsive. But that's really all James can do. You really only have one attack, but you also have a dodge move, which was something else I was concerned about. I was afraid that they would have either a dodge or a block button, and then you would have like a parry system, that's not something you want to have in a horror game. But the thing about the dodge in this game is that even though you have the ability to dodge, you aren't always locked onto the enemy. So there are times where you dodge and the enemy will actually stumble outside your field of vision, and then as you're reorienting, they could be gearing up for another attack. Now, a lot of people are probably going to say that's cheap, but I feel it works for the game. When James dodges, it's not that he's moving out of the way with the grace and finesse of a boxer. He's just scrambling out of the way, so as a result, the melee combat comes off as clumsy, and though it is still usable enough to where if there's one enemy for you to take out, there's still a very good chance that you're going to take some damage if you choose to do that. And you are definitely going to take some damage if you try to melee fight a bunch of enemies coming at you at once, in which case you want to pull the guns out. In regards to the guns, the shooting, it definitely has its style of the Resident Evil 2 remake, which I'm honestly getting a little tired of with Resident Evil 3 and especially the Resident Evil 4 remake. I got a little annoyed with the fact that you have to wait a second for the crosshair to line up before you could actually shoot. For a military operator, that doesn't really make sense. It would be used to going from target to target. But in the case of James, I think it does make sense for the shooting to be like that. James is the type of character who would know how to use guns for a very specific reason, and that reason wouldn't be that he is going in a combat scenario, so it would probably take him a second to line up the sights. So I thought that was really well done, and it's not like they added a bunch of weapons to the mix either. You still just have the pistol, you still just have the shotgun, and you still just have a rifle. And then you have the 2x4 and eventually a pipe for melee combat. And combat doesn't go much deeper than that, and I am completely okay with that. They just made it better than it was in the original Silent Hill. And they also didn't go so far as to make this an action game either. Whenever you see an enemy, you're always thinking about whether or not you actively want to engage them in combat, and you're also thinking about how you want to engage enemies in combat. For example, there are plenty of sections where you're walking down a hallway and you see like a crawler standing in like an intersection. Now, crawlers are pretty easy to deal with in regards to melee, but because it's standing in the intersection, you don't know if there's like a mannequin or something standing there. And if a mannequin is standing there, that means you're all of a sudden going to be fighting two enemies, which the melee combat isn't intended for. And you're probably going to take a few shots, so you might want to take a few shots of the crawler, lure it into the hallway so you can take it out before investigating that intersection. There are plenty of great moments like that in the game, and that brings us to another aspect that they've really improved, and that's the survival elements. In Silent Hill 2, because the enemies just weren't much of a threat to begin with, it was very easy to stockpile health items and resources, but in Silent Hill 2 Remake, resources are much scarcer. So in the original game, when you picked up a box of bullets, you would typically get like 10. In this game, the most you would get is 5, and most of the time you're only getting like 2 or 3 bullets. Less if you're talking about the shotgun or rifle. And because of that, you're constantly having to manage and ration what resources you have. In fact, it completely disproves something I said in my Gameology series recently, the fact that you need a limited inventory for a survival horror to work. But, Lord and behold, Bloomberg team, they must have played this game so many times trying to figure out how much ammo was necessary in order to get by, while also providing the player with so little that they never feel safe, and that's just how it is in Silent Hill 2. I was always mindful of how much health and ammo I have, which is exactly what you want in a survival horror game. This is not an action game by any stretch of the imagination. You still have to think about what you're doing. You still have to pick your battles, and that is a good thing. The puzzles are just as great as always. There are actually a lot of new ones. That's something else a lot of people have complained about. They've complained about how they've added to the game, and a lot of people are trying to argue that it's in opposition to the creative vision of the original game, which it's not. Most of the new sections of the game I actually feel add to it in a real meaningful way. And most of these new puzzles are actually pretty intricate too. A couple of them had me scratching my head, and they've also cut down on a lot of the obtuse design that the original Silent Hill 2 had going for it. For example, one of the puzzles in the original Silent Hill was you needed to unclog a trash chute. So the idea was you need to drop something heavy down there. So what you need to do is drop a pack of orange juice down there. But that probably wouldn't be your first inclination of what you need to do with that orange juice. Yeah, it says that it's heavy, but I think it would have made more sense if it was like a bowling ball or something like that instead of, something you drink. That was just a weird choice for that game. And while that puzzle is still here, the orange juice is located right by where that chute is, so it's very easy to connect those dots. So, by all accounts, this game is just 100% better than the original Silent Hill in regards to its gameplay. Silent Hill 2 has always been one of those games that I say is good despite its gameplay, not because of it. Now I can say that Silent Hill 2 is good because of its gameplay in addition to everything else. Oh, it's the full package now. But I still did have some big issues with the gameplay, and they mostly come down to difficulty. For starters, some of the enemies can be really annoying. The one that really got on the two that really got on my nerves were the cockroaches, which just are an annoyance most of the time. But the other ones that I really did not like were the mannequins. So how the mannequins worked in the original Silent Hill 2 was they wouldn't always be moving, and when they weren't moving, they weren't giving off static on the radio. But that was balanced out by the fact that they typically didn't start moving until you shined your light on them. So by the time you realized that there was a threat in the room, odds are they were already attacking you. But you still had a chance to, defend yourself. In this game, they become active when you reach a certain proximity to them, and they are always put around corners and everything, and because of that, it's really easy for them to get the drop on you, even if you are paying attention. So that just seemed like I was getting a lot of cheap hits a lot of the time, even if I was being careful. Something else I really didn't like about the game were two of the boss fights. The fight with Eddie was especially bad, and the final boss just sucks. I mean, like, everything else in the game is just fine, but those two fights in particular just seem to be at odds at the rules that were being played with at the time. In regards to the content, something else a lot of people have brought up is that the game might be a little too long, and in some respects, I do kind of agree with that. It took me 25 hours to finish the game, whereas I think the original Silent Hill, I could probably finish it in like 8 hours or so. So, yeah, that's probably going to be tiring for a lot of people, especially if they are really familiar with the old game. But as I was playing Silent Hill 2, the remake that is, I never felt like any point of the game was dragging, so to speak. There's definitely some sections of the game that I feel you could have cut out just to save time. For example, as you're making your way into Silent Hill, you have to stop by in a garage to find a key to get through a gate. Stuff like that could have been cut out, and that probably could have cut the runtime down to maybe 20 hours or so. But I also understand why they wanted to beef up the content, because games like this are now having to be sold at $70, which a lot of people are really complaining about, but you gotta remember production costs are getting out of control. And because Sony, for some reason, doesn't want to tell their developers that they have to work within the constraints of their console like Nintendo does, this is just what has to happen. So yeah, I'm glad that the game is as long as it is, and there's a lot of replay value now too. You now have, I think, 8 different endings that you can play for, and they're a lot tougher to get this time. Whenever I play Silent Hill 2, I typically get the ending where James leaves Silent Hill, but in this game I got the in-water ending, which I wasn't expecting. So that kind of makes me want to play again, because, like, I don't like that ending. Like, James has issues, but I do like him as a character, and I do sympathize for him. I do want him to survive this ordeal, so yeah, I'm falling into the game's trap. I'm probably not going to play this game again for a while, though. There are just other games that I want to get to right now, and I've spent enough time on this game, but on all fronts, I had a great time with the Silent Hill 2 remake, and I'm glad it's as good as it was. Bloomberg team, I've been very dismissive of the choice to put them on this project, but they should be commended for the work. They did a fantastic job with this, and I honestly wouldn't mind seeing them do another one. Now, should they remake more games in the series? A lot of people are saying that they should have done a remake of the original Silent Hill before doing this one. But again, I think doing it of Silent Hill 2 first was a good idea because now they can, reorient the series to focus on that personal horror, because that is just far more fascinating than the occult horror that the first game focuses on, and also what most of the series focuses on in general. So I think this was the right call. Would I still like to see some of the old games brought back? Yes, I would like to see Silent Hill get a remake, get a re-release. Silent Hill 3, maybe. But most of the other games in the Silent Hill series just aren't terribly good to begin with. Silent Hill is a series that just really went downhill after its first 4 entries or so. So I'd be more interested in seeing new games in the series as opposed to remakes of the old games. But there are still some I would like to see be re-released just because they are so good. The original Silent Hill is especially good, and I hope we get to see that one again soon. Not necessarily a remake, but maybe just a re-release on PS5 or something. But anyway, that's my thoughts on the Silent Hill 2, guys. If you haven't played it yet, I highly recommend you go and do so, because this is probably, if the year ended tomorrow, this probably would be my game of the year. But that's going to do it for this vlog, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.